because I will also say there's a lot of time and energy spent on pregnancy, and there could be more for sure. We tend to focus a lot on planning for pregnancy, and then there is no planning for postpartum. That's when you really need it. So you, as the person birthing the child, the baby will be fine. Like, you need the care.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Eat More Carbs podcast. Before we jump into our usual content, we have a quick trigger warning about this week's episode.
In this week's episode, our guest Melanie shares a lot about pregnancy. She also shares about pregnancy loss, disordered eating, and eating disorders. We understand that this is a very sensitive topic. While Melanie provides tons of education in this podcast, we understand that it might not be right for you, which is why we have plenty of other podcasts with other educational topics that can help you along with your fueling journey.
If you're deciding to skip this episode, we'll see you next week.
Hello and welcome to the Eat More Carbs podcast. My name is Jenna Fisher and I'm here with my co-host Reilly Beatty. Today we have Mel on to answer some questions. For those listeners who don't know you, Mel, can you take a couple seconds and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Sulaver. I'm also a registered dietitian. I specialize in performance nutrition and women's health. I guess that's kind of the short version. We'll get more into, I think, the nitty gritty. A lot of the work I do in a one-on-one capacity is in the perinatal sports realm. So fertility, pregnancy, postpartum athletes, working through disordered eating behavior, histories of, that can very much be triggered as we start to enter this journey. And I've seen it at all levels of athleticism, from Olympic athletes to some maybe of our everyday athletes. So it is beautiful work. It's intimate work. I don't take a moment of it for granted. And I'm pretty aggressively passionate about educating the educators, coaches, trainers, athletic support staff, anyone in a place to support our female athletes at large, but particularly in this window of time. So excited to be able to kind of share and disseminate what I'm sure will come up as maybe some myths in this realm of kind of our athleticism that we might navigate as well.
Mel, we are so excited to have you on and kind of navigate some questions maybe even Reilly and I have about that time of life. Before we get into some of those questions, we're going to do a high and low segment where we just share a little bit about our week, the good, and maybe the parts we wish had gone a little bit differently. Reilly, can you kick us off?
Yeah. So I usually start off with my low, but I'm going to start with my high today. It is National RD Day. Yay. My high is actually Jenna. I'm going to get super sappy here. We might cry on the podcast. Jenna is my high. She's been holding down the fort at RBSN for the last couple of months and being such a supportive friend and then also colleague and somebody that's working with us, I guess coworker, during my maternity leave. So my high is Jenna. I'm going to start crying. Might not be the first time in today's episode. Yeah. So Jenna, love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then my low is actually, it's about one of my dogs. Unfortunately, she dislocated her hip, which we're really upset about. She is super high energy. She's like, I'm the queen. I want to be out there, running around. She loves to go on walks, loves to run through the woods. And unfortunately, she's been on a little bit of bed rest. Hopefully she's getting better. She does not like that she can't go for her daily walk, but she's on the road to recovery.
Rest and recovery, and hopefully she feels better soon. My high and low for the week. My high is that we've had just a wonderful amount of people come and visit us. It's springtime in Arizona, so the weather is beautiful. So we've had so many people that have filled our house with such joy these past couple of weeks, and we're very thankful for that. My low for the week, we had coffee this past Sunday morning, my husband and I, and my husband's so sweet, gets up to refill my coffee and is walking back over. He just dropped the coffee mug and the coffee went all over our living room. So we had a white rug. We don't have a white rug anymore. That's my high and low for the week. Melanie, do you have a high and low?
I do. I'm gonna start with my low because it'll lean into my high, and I will also do my best not to get upset. Since giving birth to Tiberius, who's my 2.5-year-old now, have had like on and off pain in my leg, or like numbness and tingling. And I had a pregnancy loss about 2.5 months ago. And since then, the tingling has become like almost flare-like. So for those of you who are not, I'm going to say kind of like in a medical space where you understand what that means, it's just become like very severe. So I actually had an MRI done on my birthday, and I have a really bad bulge in one of my discs. And actually, like literally 2 hours ago, my pelvic floor PT who also happens to be my best friend, called me and she was like, I really think we need to consider surgery for this versus just giving it time for physical therapy to heal and then try PT because I want to have another baby. And I think it's kind of in line with our topic today, right? And like the journey to motherhood and motherhood, there's many roads to that. But I can share with you, for me, I did not expect that my body might not be able to handle another pregnancy or handle a birth in particular. So I'm in the middle of making some hard decisions with my amazing husband about what the next step is for like family planning for my body, because the herniation I have is compressing on roots that like could cause paralysis and like much larger issues. So that's my low, and it's sad and hard and awful, but it's real. My high in that is I have an unbelievable support system. So even just mentoring the pelvic floor physical therapist who happens to be my best friend, and the ortho who wrestled with my husband at Michigan many years ago, and I'm going to be meeting with a neurosurgeon. So like I have a team of people who I know are not BSing me, like are going to be honest with me. And I'm also, I think the high is also the gratitude for myself of being, and I know this is like the appropriate podcast to share that, knowing the work you do, Reilly, and the work I do in the space of histories of disordered eating and eating disorders. Having been an athlete who struggled with that, I'm in a space where I can approach the next couple months, potentially longer, of healing and a road to recovery that is like, okay, I can make rational decisions for myself, for my body, without other language going on in my head. A low, but also a recognition of gratitude.
Thank you so much for sharing that high and that low.
I know, I'm sorry, guys. It's a rough one.
No, we appreciate you being honest and open. And that's like what we want to talk about in this podcast. And there's a lot of that like I resonate with. And I know that a lot of people who are listening resonate with, especially with like bodies and being able to birth and all of that stuff, because I went through a similar journey. So we appreciate you being honest and open.
None of it is easy. And I think that's it's a beautiful way to at least even start the topic of today, because when I'm coaching motherhood, when I'm presenting on motherhood, particularly in the world of sport, it's helping people understand not just the person who is going to be birthing a child, but also anyone supporting them, that motherhood is like the ultimate surrender for any of us, and not just the birth piece, but the journey to it. And it is that much harder when you've been in other positions with your body that have been challenging.
That I think is such a powerful thing and something that so many women feel so strongly. So thank you for saying that, because it's hard to put that into words sometimes.
Well, Mel, we're so excited that you're on. We're really happy to have some open and honest discussion, especially as we talk about this pregnancy postpartum period for so many women. And we're really excited to kind of pick your brain and get your take and your advice on this really important period of life.
Let's do it.
Can you discuss some of the nutritional needs of women during postpartum period, particularly those who are breastfeeding? I feel like I've seen a lot of things on social media recently that try to convince women that they don't have any different needs than that of what they would be doing regularly. So I'd love if you could maybe kind of myth bust or just talk through what that looks like.
Yes, more than happy to. Good old social media. So a couple things, but first and foremost, I think breastfeeding or not, and this is part of like the giving yourself some grace, if possible. I think the other thing I would say is, if you're in a place where you're even considering, whether you want to have a baby or not, or you're in, going through egg freezing and some of these things, and you're just flirting with the idea of potentially starting this journey to motherhood within the context of your own body. If you are someone who struggles with any sort of disordered eating behavior, it does not have to be a full-blown eating disorder. I think that needs to be said. If you're struggling, it's worth getting help. It's important to acknowledge that this window of time in particular can be incredibly challenging, even though logically we can all talk about how our bodies are going to change, not just during pregnancy, but particularly in postpartum, because I will also say there's a lot of time and energy spent on pregnancy, and there could be more for sure. We tend to focus a lot on planning for pregnancy, and then there is no planning for postpartum. That's when you really need it. So you, as the person birthing the child, the baby will be fine. Like, you need the care. So that being said, your energy needs, the requirements of your body are actually higher postpartum than they are during pregnancy. And if you want to use that from like a caloric reference, if we think about basic general guidelines, we have more anecdotal information from the many women who have birthed children, but postpartum we require more energy. And that can be somewhere between 500, 750 extra calories. I mean, I have understanding that my population that I work with is also predominantly like active female athletes, people who identify as athletes. So they have continued to train and move throughout their pregnancy, and they are anxious to return to that postpartum. But these energy demands are outside of you asking more of your body in the context of performance. This is just for you to recover from birth, to replete your nutrient stores through pregnancy, because a lot of that has likely been depleted. I'm going to talk more specifically about nutrients there in a second. We add lactation on top of that. And it's a fun share, but I'm actually working on my IBCLC, which is your International Breastfeeding Clinical Lactation Consultant. Yes, we need energy to lactate. And so I also see a lot of people who struggle with lactation. And I know just from the lens of dietary support that if we're heading into postpartum expecting to be back in this pre-baby body and we're slashing our intake, or we don't think that we need as much as we need, you're not going to be able to support your body in producing breast milk, let alone recover from birth, let alone start returning to sport or exercise in any capacity. So first and foremost, like we really need to prioritize that total energy intake, and in turn, like your carbohydrate intake, your protein intake. We want to make sure we're staying hydrated. Again, in the context of lactation, you're producing milk, that's fluid coming from your body. My best tip for that is always like keep a water bottle with you, around you, on every table, chair, like surface where you might be sitting with your baby, because if you get nap trapped, or depending on what your birth experience was like, it might not be easy for you to move around. So how can we simplify this process as much as possible for you? And then the three other big micronutrient notes I want to give here that we don't talk a lot about are, calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium in particular are going to be consistent in your breast milk supply independent of your nutrient intake. So when we think about, for us, osteoporosis, osteopenia, particularly those of us who have struggled in the past with restrictive eating behaviors, we're already at higher risk for these things. Now you're going to breastfeed, and if you are not taking in enough of those nutrients to support your body, the baby's still going to get them. So that is coming from your bones. So really being on top of that. And then when we look at our fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, some of our B vitamins, it's important to understand that if you're not taking in enough of those foods, those types of nutrients, the baby actually won't get them. Vitamin D is the one that comes up a lot. We will often suggest that you supplement. It doesn't hurt to supplement because vitamin D is actually pretty hard to get in high enough amounts through your diet, but the baby can get an adequate amount if you're getting enough. So the baby doesn't necessarily need to supplement, but you do. So those would be my larger notes in the context of breastfeeding in particular. And then again, just acknowledging the importance of adequate energy intake. If you are stressed, anxious, and in a state of low energy availability, that's also going to reduce your milk production. It's always interesting being someone who also supports female athletes and addresses REDS and LEA, because the same rules apply here. They're just heightened because our risks just goes up because our needs are so high.
As somebody who's in that postpartum period right now, there's so many things that make total sense what you're mentioning, and also I resonate with. Probably the first or second day that I got home from the hospital, I told my husband that he needed to go to Target and buy the biggest water bottle possible, because the amount of water that I was drinking, it was insane. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and being like, oh my gosh, I have to go fill my water bottle again. I was like, I need to go find the biggest water bottle. And I love, I guess, kind of switching topics, but kind of focusing on something that you said, but I love how you bring up this postpartum period as one of the most important periods, if not the most important period for the mom. I was actually talking to Robbie, my husband, about this because I had a C-section. It was unplanned, but she wasn't coming out. My hips are too small. We could talk about that on the topic of bodies and things like that. We were talking about my first appointment after birth, and he was like, when's your appointment? Don't you have an appointment 2 weeks after? And I was like, no, my first appointment's 6 weeks after, which is really interesting because especially in that third trimester, you're going to the doctor every single week. I go to the doctor 6 weeks after, and they're like, we'll see you in a year. And I was like, okay. But just I really liked my medical team, but that's what insurance covers. That's like the standard of care. And it's just really interesting that you're kind of just like let loose, especially because there's a lot of like the hormonal drop really doesn't happen until 3 months postpartum and all of that stuff. So I think it's really interesting. And I'm really happy that you brought that up.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things to gauge feedback on from like men. So I presented at the NSCA this past summer, and it was like predominantly male coaches in the room, and it was on this topic. And it was beautiful feedback for them to like be there and ask questions and be supported. But this is a hard area to be in if you haven't gone through it, because there's things that no one talks about or you don't recognize. You're still trying to find your body and your pelvic floor and just your deeper core muscle. I mean, or just you're cleared to exercise. Well, like, what does that mean? There's just no guidance, let alone like a potential referral to pelvic floor PT. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. You know, I know the questions I'm constantly asking when I'm advocating this within a larger platform is, how can we just help people make informed decisions or ask better questions? Or, you know, if they're not automatically getting a referral, that they recognize that's something that they have access to, or do they have access to it? And if we don't, can we get that, you know, access to it somewhere else?
It's also wild too. Something that we always talk about on this podcast is it depends. And it's wild that we're not talking about that when it comes to postpartum nutrition, especially when you're looking at advice online, or, you know, I'm in postpartum mom support groups and people are always, you know, talking about stuff. It's crazy that we're all different women and we all have different needs. Our babies have different needs. And then we get these like generic calorie guidelines where it's like, you're producing, you know, 80 ounces of milk, you're producing 20 ounces of milk. Like, we have completely different needs.
Correct. You know, even again, like outside of just milk production, what was your state heading into postpartum? So, you know, again, are you an athlete that may or may not, like, you know, are you someone who had a large amount of muscle mass on your body, which in general would indicate that you have higher energy needs to begin with? You know, there's so many factors into it. So I'm 100% with you. You know, you look at, there are some postpartum meal delivery services, but the portions are ridiculous. Like, I need 5 of those little tiny kanji cups, not one. Like, that's not going to get it done. So already we're setting people up to be, my session earlier was with a female athlete. She is now 6.5 months postpartum, history of an eating disorder. Pregnancy was incredibly challenging for her. And we're, you know, consciously continuing to work on this place of like, where are you in your body? Are you honoring like that you need to eat? We're still working through like, yes, these portions are normal for you. Like, you need those things to continue to do what you're asking of your body to continue to lactate. It's challenging when I think the information coming at us, not just from public health, but the internet, where people are looking for the one answer, when we're sitting here like, we want to help you and support you, but we also need you to understand there's not one answer. There is no one size fits all approach. That's hard when people are struggling.
It is really challenging. We've kind of chatted a little bit about some of the challenges of this period. How do you help women overcome these challenges?
Some of it is just understanding where they're at and what makes it hard. I mean, some of the common ones in the first window of time are understanding the expectation. And so my hope is I always have an opportunity to work with them either in pregnancy or preconception. So by the time they get to postpartum, they're ready. You can plan for postpartum. You eating or not eating, you eating is the better thing than not eating. So the last thing that I want to do is be like, you have to eat these specific foods, but there are nutrients that are important for you to focus on. And I'm a big fan of, as I know you are, like, let's support the nutrients, let's support the incorporation of specific foods versus give you target numbers to hit. Leaning into some of that preparation can be helpful. There's a lot of discussion about the first 40 days, the first 3 months, and we forget that our body's continuing to change for 2 years after we've given birth, and that is exclusive of lactation or not. Even looping in these expectations of weight loss and my body going back to what it was, or kind of some of the useless dialogue we get from society. My first intention with everyone is like, what is it that you expect to happen? And let's talk about that rationally because of what you need to know may or may not happen. So coming back to this idea of like, there is surrender here. How can I support you in starting to work through the things that make it harder for you to give yourself permission to try something new, or give yourself permission to be curious about how your body responds to something. But a lot of it is working through the behavior, understanding the expectation, and in many ways helping them realign their expectations with their actions based on what they're doing.
You hit on something really big there, which is the society pressure to return to maybe a pre-pregnancy weight or something like that. I recently saw a video of a girl who was really excited to be fitting back in her pre-pregnancy jeans a month after giving birth. And I think that's really dangerous to get into that idea that you should be a certain size at any point in time, because our bodies are always changing. But how do you help women who are maybe concerned about weight or weight loss in that postpartum time overcome that side of things?
I mean, the first thing we have to do is unpack the unsupportive narratives, right? So if they're still, just bringing even this back to like disordered eating behavior, body dysmorphia, what are the narratives that are playing out in your head that are not helpful for you? And how can we establish a more realistic expectation? You're your own N1. I was just tagged in something. Someone was asking a professional athlete, which often is what happens, right? Like a professional athlete is often asked as the example, where the professional athlete is the anomaly. Like they're the exception. They're not, I think, the commonplace between most of us that are not, our living doesn't rely on us getting back to sport and performance. And there's a different series of questions and support that would go into someone like that than there is for someone who maybe take us, they played soccer in college, they have exited, they've been active their whole life, now they've had a baby, and they're like, I need to get back to moving in a way that makes me feel good in my body. Like, what does that look like? How do I start to shift into a body I feel confident in? And one of the questions I start to pose for them is, if you only value the size of your body and that takes preference above everything else that you do, then once again, we're in this place, well, anything else that you do, any other progress you make, any other light you experience in your life doesn't matter, because that's not changing. And so we have to figure out a way to turn the dial down on that as your sole identity. The constant comparison of where I am in my body now versus where I was in my body 5 years ago. One of my favorite exercises for people is, what I want you to do is I want you to make a list of where you are in your body right now. And sure, you want to use those metrics that you're tied to, put them down. But I also want you to put down like what your meals are like. Are you ordering out? Are you eating at home? Do you have a baby? Yes. Like you didn't have like all of the things that, what does your training look like, right? And like, what is your life like right now? And I want you to do the exact same thing in that 5 year ago, 3 year ago, 10 year ago mark, where you feel like you need to get back to, or you're comparing yourself to. And what you recognize is we're dealing with totally different people. Like you are in a very different place in your life. And so it is unfair of you to be asking this of your body. It tends to help actually open up a conversation in a place where they couldn't see past the number. They couldn't see past the gene size. So the first step, I think, if we talk even as dietitians, like where they at in their stage of change, we have to focus on where they are and just help them recognize. As a dietitian, as a human being, I don't tell people what to do. It is a collaborative effort. I like to think of myself as like the facilitator, the support system, the holder of space, the guide, where I'm supporting them in making the best decision for themselves. If I'm dictating what they're doing, it doesn't give them the autonomy to make decisions. And the reality is, like, they're the one in their body. They know it best. I want you to be in a place where you can tell me, here's how I'm feeling right now. Here's what I think I need. Here's the tool that might be helpful. And we can expand upon that.
I love that. We do a similar approach at RBSN. People are always like, hey, make me a meal plan. I'm like, actually, you're going to come work with us and you're going to make your own plan. We're going to support you on that. I love that you take the same approach. So for athletes who are training, or maybe, I guess, getting back to their training level at a high level, what are maybe like 3 things? I know it depends for everybody, but 3 things or tips or areas to focus on if you are somebody who is breast or chest feeding.
You need to prioritize overall energy intake. So don't skip out on those carbohydrates. Really prioritize your protein needs. Those would be my nutrition notes. And the other one would be like, please consider seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist, or at the very least, like a physical therapist, but someone who is familiar with working through and with postpartum athletes and return to sport. Your body is different after you've carried a child. So like your anatomy itself might be different. And so you might move differently, which can impact you're a runner, it can impact how you run and your stride. Again, things that might lead to injury. If you're lifting heavy, like all of these things, I think of soccer and like I'm scared to shoot a soccer ball. Well, right now I can't because my back, but in general, I was like, I'm nervous to do this right now because I just, it's different. So working with someone who can also support you with your body and mechanics can be invaluable there as well.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about the impact of exercise intensity and duration on nutritional needs in that postpartum period? Does that change for an athlete versus someone who's maybe less active?
Yes, but it doesn't change in the sense that you need anything different. It's just we have the ability to dig ourselves into a hole. And so, I have alluded to this, but haven't directly said it. Like as a postpartum athlete, you're at a higher risk for relative energy deficiency in sport. I don't have numbers, statistics to support that, but I can promise you're at a higher risk because of the elevated needs of your energy. And so, even in our first kind of question conversation, I was like, adequate energy intake. And so the hierarchy of needs is literally always the same. It's just how much you need is going to increase. And so, what I would say is if you're returning to sport, like please be very conscious about prioritizing your meal times, like block the time to eat. If you find yourself skipping meals or snacks, diagnose, if you will, like why that's happening, even just acknowledging having an infant in particular, like it'll shift a little bit because once they become mobile, it's a different type of energy that comes from us. Like you're still breast, like your needs are still the same, but like your headspace is also going to shift. Maybe the ability to prep when they're laying in their DockATot or whatever it is, like you can get up and make a meal. They're stationary. Once they start moving, we have a different scenario. And so just understanding that different stages of motherhood even can present some different challenges. And so if you find yourself skipping meals, if you find yourself skipping snacks, what is the solution to that? If it requires you doing a little bit more prep, if it requires you ordering in a little bit more, maybe it means a conversation with your partner about them doing more of the prep. This is me making the assumption that as the female, you're doing the prep, but maybe your partner is more involved in that, but like bringing them into it or utilizing, again, a meal delivery service, things that are temporary that might be worth considering in your budget that take the pressure off of you. You can put your energy somewhere else, but that you're eating between that and your hydration, because if that's not happening, then, all of the micronutrient pieces don't matter. Like we have to make sure we're eating enough. And then we can start to focus on more of the micronutrient pieces that are important for your health, for your recovery, and for your ability to feed this child the way that you're choosing to feed them if you are breastfeeding or chest feeding or even just lactating. I do have people I've worked with who are pumping. They have had a difficult time feeding from the breast or the chest, but they are able to pump. And so they're still choosing to give breast milk. Like those energy needs are still high. How can we continue to prioritize and make sure that you do eat? That hierarchy of needs is the same. If you're a female athlete, like you're at a risk for vitamin D deficiency, calcium deficiency, iron deficiency. We didn't talk about iron, like those things just become more important for you to acknowledge and pay attention to as a part of your overall energy intake.
You have provided like so much knowledge and insight, and we're going to definitely have to have you on again because there's just so much value in everything that you're sharing. But we're going to have to jump into our ending questions, if that's all right. We have 4 questions that we always ask all of our guests. And because it is the Eat More Carbs podcast, we have to ask what your favorite carbohydrate is.
For sure, rice. It's the Colombian side of me, like rice and beans are signature.
Love it. I don't think we've heard rice yet, but it's such a good one. Such a staple. What's your favorite pre-workout fuel?
If I have an hour or more, I am like an overnight oats or oatmeal with the protein powder, and I throw some collagen in there and my creatine. It's like an easy way to like have all of it together before I head out the door. If I've got like 30 minutes, I usually grab a Go Macro bar. Their Sweet Awakening bar has like 80 milligrams of caffeine. So it's like just enough to like, oh, this feels nice. And then I can continue on with whatever I need to go do.
What's your favorite post-workout fuel?
I would say like, because I like to have my protein shake pre, I like to really prioritize that meal. Favorite, when I'm back in New York, I was originally in New York, everybody. I've been in Ann Arbor now for the last 2 years, so I no longer have access to bagels the way that I did. That's not fair. There are bagels in Ann Arbor. It's just hard to eat a bagel outside of New York when you have grown up in New York your entire life. And I used to have bagels every day when we were living in New York City. So I really enjoy making a bagel sandwich. So like 3 or 4 eggs, maybe some like leafy greens, some avocado. and like a very delicious, either like 7-grain or everything egg bagel would be my go-to.
Yum.
I am so hungry now.
I know.
I would just want a bagel, and it's not going to happen for a while. So,
And then our last question has nothing to do with nutrition, and it's often the hardest question of the entire podcast. What is your favorite pair of kicks? We're big shoe people. Jenna was on the hunt for running shoes, but she's open, I think, to more suggestions. I think she found a pair.
Okay.
But any shoe suggestions?
I think honestly, my favorite shoe in my collection of shoes, I have hot pink Converses. I'm a big hot pink fan, and I was like well before Barbie came out. So just to be clear, this isn't like a new thing for me. It's always been like a deep part of my soul.
And you're rocking a hot pink right now. I love it.
Mel, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Like Reilly said, you're just a wealth of knowledge in this realm, and we so appreciate you sharing everything that you have shared today. For anyone who might want to find or follow along with you, maybe even ask you some questions, what is the best way for people to do that?
My social media is Nutrition by Mel. Nutritionbymel.com is my website, so you can contact me there. Mel@nutritionbymel.com is my email. So any of those three would be great.
We will leave all of Mel's contact information in the podcast show notes. That way you can easily find her on social media or contact her if you'd like to. If you have questions for Reilly and I, you can always leave them below, or you can find us on Instagram. We're at the Eat More Carbs podcast. You can find Reilly at reilly.beatty.nutrition, and you can find me at jenna.fisher.nutrition. Mel, thank you again for being on. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Eat More Carbs podcast. Please, as always, make sure you rate, subscribe, and review. And as always, remember to eat more carbs.